Welcome to ePathshala. I am Dr. Vishal G. Jadhav, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology, Tilak Maharashtra Vidya-mitra, Pune. Today, we are going to examine a module called Feminist Critique of Durkheimian Sociology. By now, all of you must have been familiarized with Emile Durkheim's sociology. To many scholars, he is a structural functionalist who has tried and who has endeavored to understand how society changed from the pre-modern to the modern, what kinds of networks, what kinds of social institutions necessitated this kind of change, and what kind of modernity did it imply. Now, Durkheim, who believed in social cohesion, who argued that society in modernity can only function well if social cohesion exists, and social cohesion can only come about through collective effervescence. For him, collective effervescence actually meant collective consciousness of people. This collective consciousness and effervescence actually meant social fact, which basically means that it is a coercive external structure that imposes itself on individuals' freedom. Now, starting from here, Durkheim tries to extrapolate how important it is to maintain order in society. This particular module will try and question this particular viewpoint because it does not discuss about power relations in society. Durkheim's position is of a positivist, meaning it only talks about structural impositions, but it does not talk about agency. And what is most important is it invisibilizes the role of women in the making of history and in the making of social order. Have you ever wondered about the implications of Emile Durkheim's theories in sociology? Are they relevant today? More importantly, to whom are they important? Obviously, sociological theories are important to the subject and students of sociology. They are important in answering questions about how social order is maintained and how social change happens. They are important because they can analyze the relationship between individuals and societies. They are also important because they can help us understand the issues of inequality and injustice. By doing research and by using theories, sociologists claim to offer explanations and even solutions to the concerns of a society. Given this role of sociology, a lot of critical perspectives have informed sociology. Critical perspectives like Marxism have laid the foundations of sociology. In India, Dalit sociology has changed and moved mainstream sociology. This module will ask the question, what is the relationship of feminisms to sociology and particularly to the work of Emile Durkheim, whom we all know as a famous structural functionalist. As a student of sociology, has the absence and marginalization of women in classical sociology ever come to your mind? We know that women's sociologists and theorists are seldom taught. In fact, classical sociological theory has been framed largely in terms of the white, male, Western fathers, quote unquote, of sociology: Marx, Emile Durkheim, and Max Weber. It would be rare for students to know about Harriet Martineau, Charlotte Perkins, Gilman, Marianne Schneider, Weber, and Doris Wilkinson, women sociologists who worked and contributed around the same time as the men or the so-called father sociologists. Feminist sociology. So what is feminist sociology? Feminist sociology is a kind of sociology which uses insights from the feminist movements to shape feminist scholarship. It is based on praxis. Feminism intersects by critiquing and by reclaiming the theories and methods of sociology to produce knowledge which is suited to addressing questions of gender hierarchies. Beginning with asking questions about why so few women make it to the top on the professional ladder, to asking why are sociological theories either gender blind or gender biased. Feminist sociology traverses the entire domain of sociology. As feminist sociology developed and the second wave feminist movement grew, feminists began retrieving the work of women sociologists. This was also the time that feminist sociologists critically began challenging the foundational theories and methods of sociology. Naturally, they had to question the founding fathers, the masters of sociology. Feminists argued that while we owe a disciplinary debt to the analysis and models provided by classical sociology to capture the many elements of the social world, their language and analysis is rooted in a sort of a Eurocentric masculinist bias, which privileges the men and invisibilizes the women. Feminists therefore argued the necessity to critique the classical sociological approaches. They argue that these have been inadequate in their analysis of the social world in ways which we shall discuss below. This module picks up a few themes from Durkheim's methodology, his theories, and his substantive contributions to illustrate the male-centeredness of his approach. Critiquing positivism. While positivism has been critiqued by Weber, it became the dominant paradigm in sociology, particularly in America. Feminists have been part of developing this critique. Emile Durkheim was a positivist. In fact, he developed positivism in a manner that gave sociology its status and identity. Durkheim's positivism was modeled on the method of natural sciences. Durkheim, following Auguste Comte, wanted to establish sociology as a separate and distinct field from biology and psychology. And trying to do so, Durkheim developed a positivist ontology based on social determinism and a positivist epistemology based on the idea of studying causes of social phenomena. Durkheim believed that social beings are governed by what we called social facts. As you would have already studied, social facts are ways of being and acting which are collective, coercive, and external. Durkheim stated that human beings are shaped, formed, and controlled by these social facts. In a Durkheimian sociology, human beings have limited agency. They are largely socialized into conforming to the social norms. while women face tremendous control upon their lives from external social world, feminists have argued for a freer conceptualization of human agency. Most feminists critique social determinism on the grounds that though we are all deeply formed and constructed by social universes, we can change these. In a sense, the feminist movements have challenged the ideas that patriarchal structures are based on a biological given. This ontological clash between structural determinism and human agency is an important axis on which feminists have differed from Emile Durkheim. Feminist ontologies of the social universe are less deterministic than Durkheimian ontology. In fact, feminists have drawn upon interpretivist and realist ontologies of Max Weber and Karl Marx, which focus on the power of human agency to construct and transform societies. So what does this mean? How do we illustrate the difference between a Durkheimian ontology and a feminist ontology? So let's take an example. We often say that women are innately unsuited for pursuing mathematics or heavy sports or to become surgeons. We do this despite seeing so many instances which prove them contrary. Durkheimian positivism to a large extent would argue that these social facts are based on biological abilities. Durkheim often used the organic analogy to describe social system. Feminists argue to the contrary. They would say, whether we give a biological explanation or a sociological one, the fact remains that when given an opportunity, women can exercise their agency and break any norm. They can become famous mathematicians, sportswomen, and famous surgeons. Feminists would argue that this can be done by an individual or by a collective. While sociology owes its advancement to Durkheim and his peers, feminists criticize its mainstream orientation and the masculine bias which it reflects. He developed a mode of analysis that defined the social world which excluded the women. There is a wide-ranging inclination in social sciences to generalize from male samples to the whole population, or to neglect the sexual differences which are highly social, as pointed out by Abbott and Wallace, that shape the world. Therefore, what is perceived as mainstream sociological research and theory have a tendency to be that which male sociologists construct. Feminists have critiqued the dominant epistemology of the empirical positivist methodology which Durkheim and his peers purported, and rejected the idea that sociological research can be value-free, objective, dispassionate, and disinterested. The unrecognized, value-laden assumptions are informed by the male researcher's bias. Feminists have also emphasized the importance of recognizing the ways in which the socio-political locations of the researcher, knower, sociologist can persuade the process of how sociological knowledge is produced. Doubts have been cast on the claims of universality of classical sociological approaches by feminists, as it was felt that classical sociologists such as Emile Durkheim and all considered their approaches that way. However, feminists in the third world or post-colonial analysts argue that there cannot be a single social theory. Gender as a category. It has been vociferously disputed by feminists that very little attention has been paid to gender as a central analytic category in sociology. Although women have been active participants since the inception of sociology, their voices and perspectives were dismissed. Example, omission of Harriet Martineau's own works such as Society in America and How to Observe Moral and Manners, which pre-existed 2 decades prior to Comte's work, is indeed one of the poignant reminders of marginalization of women's work. Or they are located within family in the discipline during most of the 19th and 20th centuries. Any aspect of social life, studies, be it economy, work, family, politics, will be inadequately done if gender is not seen as a central analytical category. The founding fathers of sociology, Emile Durkheim, Auguste Comte, Simmel, Max Weber, Karl Marx, etc., drew from the 19th century doctrine of 2 spheres, with women as the private reproductive body, taking care of the home and hearth, and men as the public, political, noble mind, living in the large world of commerce and politics. Durkheim's perspective on division of labor and feminist critique. Auguste Comte, who had a considerable influence on Durkheim's positivist worldview, argued that women's duty was to make men more humane, who were alienated and sexually unstable. Marriage as an institution in sociology, according to Auguste Comte, was seen as the positivist discipline of the undisciplined, for which it was necessary for the feminine to be subordinated to the masculine. Durkheim too was of the opinion that women were needed to control the passions of the man. Women were seen as necessary for their stabilizing effect on man. Yet, paradoxically, they were seen as more primitive. Women were seen as undifferentiated, unified, and at home, whereas men were seen as differentiated because of division of labor. Feminists therefore took it upon themselves to discover and contextualize women's experiences, as to draw attention to the prevailing structures of inequalities. Durkheim's notion of division of labor has long occupied a prominent place in sociology as the foundation of society and economy. Immense social value was attributed to division of labor along sex lines, as if to say, biology determines the abilities and tasks of men and women. The matrix of sexual division of labor is the principle according to which the modern society is structured. This means that women assume the role of the nurturer and caters to her family's needs of food, clothing, clean housing, whereas men assume the role of providers, playing an active role in production, which is arbitrated by money and exchange. This principle means that women do the unpaid labor, take care of effective functions which are valued lesser than their male counterpart, who perform the paid tasks and take care of the intellectual functions. Evidently, one can detect that along with a woman being a housewife, sexual divisions of labor have translated into the social professions of women too. Women are teachers, nurses, secretaries, and other caregiving professions which are lesser valued and paid much lesser than the masculine jobs of the male counterparts. Division of labor might be outwardly desirable, seeing that necessary and basic functions can be performed by its virtue. However, feminists problematize the expression of structural differences between men and women as natural, biological, and hierarchical. Durkheim attributed to biological explanations to explicate women's place in society. It has also been documented that sexual equality, according to Durkheim, was a primitive concept which went against nature, and he labeled it as dysfunctional. He perceived subordination of women to men as an indicator of progress. Prohibition of women from warfare and public matters has been seen as needed for the general well-being of modern complex societies. Patriarchy, therefore, for Durkheim, is the outcome of social evolution. It is very evident that Durkheim was exceedingly dismissive of the feminist movement. Therefore, while many scholars have accounted that Durkheim promoted the rights and dignity of individual and a social order based on the values of equality and justice, feminist scholars opine that his repute as the supporter of human rights is diluted by his theoretical treatment of women. Scholars like Christie have noted that his approach to a just social order is in essence devised in terms of social male individual. His idea of and commitment to a free social individual did not translate to humankind but was only limited to mankind. Feminist scholars have noted that society can never be a just society if it marginalizes the interests and well-being of women. This completely goes against the tenets of moral individualism, a theory formulated by Durkheim, which therefore cannot be universally applied. Durkheim has theorized women as weak, asocial, determined by biology, an outsider who depends on her nature. The social nature was compared with that of children, aged people and animals, and contrasted with men who were antagonistically opposite to women. These reasons were cited by Emile Durkheim to explain the different rates of suicide between men and women. Simply put, women were closer to nature and were more primitive than men. Neither did they participate in various aspects of society as men did. In general, Durkheim was of the opinion that women had lesser suicide rates in comparison to men, although different suicide rates are associated with different marital statuses and in different countries. Single and divorced men were vulnerable to suicide. He further opined that men benefited from marriage more than women. Structural functionalism. Durkheim is the least sympathetic among other founding fathers in sociology to the feminist approaches. Reason being, his views were heavily informed by structural functionalism, a theoretical understanding of society that conjectures social system as collective means to fulfill social needs. Hence, the taken for granted assumption here is that the way society is structured is the most anticipated and resourceful way for it to be organized. The society is seen as an orderly, functional whole, where everyone had their place, such as women belonging to the confines of private spaces and men to the public domains. Structural functionalism centralizes the notion of a social system, where all the parts have to develop a consensus between each other in order to reach the goal of equilibrium. The systemic goal for consensus and equilibrium removes all scope for conflict. Conflict is largely seen as problematic to the system and its social order. In fact, those parts who deviate from the expectation and the norms set for them are perceived as making trouble for the system. What this means is that if and when women individually or collectively ask any questions or present any challenges to the social status quo, they are harmful for the system's larger goal to maintain social order. To a large extent, feminists, according to the structural functionalist perspective, women and men's statuses and roles are differently and rigidly fixed. This hierarchical difference and gender differentiation renders a smooth functioning of society. Hence, structural functionalists assume such stratification to be good enough, and therefore they don't recommend any attempts ought to be made to transform this arrangement. Emile Durkheim concluded that women's subordination to men benefited men more than women. He also emphasized that these hierarchical differences are essential to the marital bond, which make the men and women depend on each other in harmonizing ways, wherein the former handles the intellectual functions and the later the emotional functions. This complementarity, division of labor, thus establishes a stable family and incorporated into wider society. Feminists, however, began challenging the dominant perspectives of structural functionalism. Jackson and Scott have mentioned elaborately about Margaret Mead challenging the naturalistic assumptions about the sex differences in his anthropological study of 3 New Guinea societies, which he witnesses as representing very dissimilar ideas about the outlook of each sex. According to her study, one of the societies were given androgynous in temperament, with both men and women demonstrating the qualities which are perceived as feminine in Western culture. In another society, both men and women performed traits which were regarded as masculine in the Western society. Her work established that attributes and roles which were considered as feminine and masculine were for the most part cultural than natural. From this module, what have we learned? Firstly, Durkheim, who was a positivist and who saw social reality through the lens of positivism, through the lens of extreme objectivity, who viewed all social phenomena as a manifestation of social structures, of social facts. Now, in this particular module, we learned that the feminists and the feminist movements have actually critiqued this static position of society, of a positivist kind of ontology that was used by Durkheim. For feminists and for social activists who are involved in the feminist movement, agency and praxis was one of the most important practices through which it is possible for fulfillment of their personal and public spheres of life. Now, it is very interesting that Durkheim, which we learnt in this particular module, Durkheim tried to analyze society through the lens of collective consciousness. Now, feminists clearly contest and question collective consciousness, and they question why it should be accepted as the moral order of things. And therefore, they actually question patriarchy in this particular fashion.